Thank you, guys. It's great to be back to Alec in a different context, wearing a very different hat. And I got to say that for the first time in a long time, I actually really feel truly optimistic for the future direction of our country. I actually do. And not in some fake politician way, because I will tell you, I was advised during the campaign, you got to be a little bit more sunny, say it's morning in America from time to time. I can't do that because it's not morning in America, or it hasn't been right now. But I think on January 20th, I think we are about to see the beginning of that new dawn. And it did not come without a fight. And you think about over the course of the last year, this was a war that we won. I don't use that lightly. Multiple assassination attempts. You have multiple prosecutions. You have all the kinds of obstacles we haven't seen in the course of American history, in modern American history. And yet here we are on the other side of it, with a unique moment where we've almost grown addicted to criticizing what the other side puts up. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, the radical Biden-Harris agenda. I've been the chief critic of all of these things in many cases. Now we have actually won the war. We now have 2 chambers of Congress at the federal level. You got a 6-3 conservative majority on the Supreme Court. A decisive mandate for a Republican president that we haven't seen in 2 decades. If we don't get this right now, we never actually will. And so it's now or never for the future of the United States of America. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how we make sure we get it done now. I think the greatest threat to our republic is the rise of a 4th branch of government that our founding fathers never envisioned. And this goes to something that's even more fundamental than the Constitution. I wouldn't say there's much that's more fundamental than the Constitution. I'm a constitutionalist, that's our North Star. But if there's one basic principle that's even upstream of the Constitution, more foundational than even the Constitution itself from 1789, it's actually the principle that guided us in 1776. The basic idea that the people we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. The basic idea that we, the people, create a government that is accountable to us, not the other way around. That's what we fought the American Revolution for. That is the whole ball game. That was the motivating force behind the 13 years that ultimately led to the Constitutional Convention after we started the American Revolution. That's the whole ball game. If we don't have that, we don't have a democracy. It's all a sham if the people who actually make the rules, the edicts that bind us, can't be voted out of office, and if we never voted for them in the first place. And yet, the dirty little secret in America today is that the people we elect to run the government are not actually the ones who run the government. They're unelected bureaucrats who are not even appointed by those who were elected, but are historically those who have viewed themselves as immune from firing, that make not just some, but literally most of the rules that bind everyday Americans. Now, we go through this legal fiction, we'll call them rules and not laws. Okay, you call it what you want. It is an edict. Okay, and the difference between an edict and a law, what is it? This goes to the American Revolution, right? Back in pre-1776 England, you had edicts. In America, we say we have laws. The difference between an edict and a law is a law is passed by somebody that you voted for, who is accountable to you. An edict is a statement that comes from on high, from somebody who restricts your behavior, but on whom you have no claim in return. Today, most of the rules that bind Americans in their everyday lives were written and passed not as laws, but as edicts by the very kind of bureaucrat who could not be removed. Regardless how they get to bind your behavior, you have literally no say in return. I'm sorry, that is not a democracy. It's not quite a monarchy. In some ways, it's even more frightening than a monarchy, because in a monarchy, at least you have one king who you could, from time to time, you'd see in history overthrow. Here it is, this dispersed, diffuse technocracy that produces a kind of monarchical force without even being acknowledged as a monarchy. And the trickier part about this, it gets even more tricky, is that the individual people who populate that bureaucracy, they're not actually individually bad people at the level of individuals, because Most people are not bad people. Most people are good people. And most people who serve in a bureaucracy, certainly in the federal government, believe that what they're doing isn't being done to harm the everyday Americans whose behaviors they bind. It's actually the opposite of that. They believe they're doing it out of their benevolence for everyday Americans who could not be trusted to govern themselves. So that's the challenge we're up against, is that we don't actually live in a pure version of a self-governing democracy or republic, but we live in a country today, and we're going to change this, but today a country where most of those rules that bind us are made by those who have no direct link of accountability to the people. And without that feedback loop, it's not a democracy. Well, the good news is we have a historic opportunity to fix it. Take the recent Supreme Court landscape of the last several years. That gives us the toolkit to accomplish what conservatives have talked about for a long time but haven't actually been able to deliver on. But this is the window in the North Star that allows us to save this country. Two examples of those cases in the last several years, the first of which is West Virginia versus EPA. Any West Virginians in the audience here? A couple of you? Good. You guys did a nice job challenging what I actually think was probably arguably the most important Supreme Court case of our generation, that held that if the law, it's a rule they call it, but functionally a law, if the rule did not go through Congress and it deals with a major question, a major economic or policy question, it's unconstitutional. It had to go through Congress if it has a major economic or policy consequence. That was seismic. That was in 2022, with the capstone coming this year in 2024 with the Loper-Bright case that held that any rule that had historically received deference, Chevron deference from the federal courts, going forward would no longer receive that level of deference from federal courts. Just those two cases alone. Let's give those people a round of applause. I appreciate that. And a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court that backstops it. Those two cases alone, let alone SEC versus Jarkissi, countless other cases that have come down saying that the administrative state cannot serve as judge, jury, executioner, rule writer, and prosecutor under one roof. Administrative law judges no longer effectively issuing 99-0 records for the very agencies whose rules they're interpreting. This is a new landscape. It's a brave new world in the best of ways for us to respect the Constitution as the new Supreme Court has told us that we must. That quite literally means that potentially a majority of existing federal regulations, as they exist on the books, are unconstitutional based on what the Supreme Court has already told us. As I said before, if we don't get this job done now of taming and downsizing our federal regulatory state, the body of federal regulations, the bureaucracy that goes along with it, if we don't get it done now, we never will. But I assure you, this is why we are here today. This is what President Trump was given a mandate to do by the American people. It was not a mandate for incremental reform. It was a mandate for sweeping reform. And that is what the voters actually deserve. Now, there will be those who ask, well, what happens when the federal government is drastically downsized? You take the scope of the regulatory state, the bureaucracy to go along with it, all of the waste, fraud, abuse, spending that often wasn't even authorized, that's going out willy-nilly out the door. What happens after that's downsized? Well, are people going to be left holding the bag? Aren't there important programs that people rely on a day-to-day basis? This is where you all come in, actually. I owe all of you, I was telling Lisa beforehand, I owe all of you an apology, because if we are successful at the work I just described that we're setting out to do, that means your workload actually goes up, like by a lot. And this was what our founding fathers envisioned. This is a conference of leaders from the states, state legislators, elected leaders at the state level. Federalism is the key to actually safely and soundly shutting down the overexpansive federal government. It is you in this room who will shoulder that responsibility. So we are counting on you. Because without you, look, is it really important for the people of this country to have access, and their children to have access to the appropriate level of education that's correct for them and their family, to be able to have access through private market mechanisms, to the kind of health care that actually allows people to live prosperous lives? Of course, these things are really important. Do we need infrastructure in this country? Of course we do. Do we need public infrastructure in this country? Of course we do. These things have historically been provided by the government, but over the years, by the federal government. Federalism is not a new answer. It was the answer envisioned by our founding fathers in 1776, where most of those governmental functions were designed to be provided to the people by states and localities and municipalities. That was the founding vision of our country. And sometimes I think we lose track when we're in the federal bubble of Washington, D.C. to think about how are we going to thin out the fourth branch of government. The answer actually rests outside of Washington, D.C., in the 50 states of our union who bear that right and responsibility to carry that out instead. The 10th Amendment actually means something. It's in the Bill of Rights for a reason. It was the bookend of the Bill of Rights. That which is not reserved to the federal government is reserved respectively to the states and to the people. And that's what's coming to your court, I hope, very soon if we get this job done. So I'll leave you with this thought in closing, is that we have been taught to believe that we are this nation in decline, that we're at the end of the ancient Roman Empire and all we have is to fight over the scraps of some shrinking pie. I don't think we have to be that nation in decline. I don't think we have to be ancient Rome. I think we still can be a nation in our ascent, a nation on our way up, a nation whose best days are actually still ahead of us, still on our way to that shining city on a hill, to that morning in America, where we will look our kids in the eye and mean it when we tell them that you get ahead in the United States of America with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, without any government or system or bureaucracy standing in your way. Remind our children, and I say this as a father of two young sons myself, remind our children that every one of us in this country and every one of you has your own unique God-given gifts. They're not the same as the God-given gifts of the person sitting next to you. And that's true diversity. That's a beautiful thing. That's what a true meritocracy is about. It recognizes that different people have different gifts, and not only is that is okay, that is beautiful, but we create a country where each of you is able to achieve the maximum of your own God-given potential without any system or bureaucracy standing in your way, and that, you know what, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are fighting to restore. We're not just against the bureaucracy, we are for that American dream. We're not just against the nightmare, we stand for the dream too. And so with your help, and that's what I'm asking you for, your preparedness to shoulder a level of work that you all have been asking for correctly, but is finally, I hope, coming your way. Be ready to accept it when it comes, because that's what George Washington and John Jay and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and our founding fathers envisioned when they set this republic into motion 250 years ago. It is 1776 in America right now, and with your help and the work we're going to hopefully get done in the context of this second Trump term, our best days as a country will be ahead of us. Thank you guys at ALEC. I appreciate you guys. God bless you and your families. Do not stop fighting for this country. Save it we will. God bless you, and may God bless our United States of America. Thank you guys.